Did you know that this little bump on the back of the brain is 10% of the brain volume, but 80% of the total amount of neurons in the cerebral cortex? This little brain, as it's known, is an amazing structure and plays a huge role in balance, coordination, posture, muscle tone, learning, and so much more. Hi, my name is Lisa Andy Garcia, and I'm an integrative developmental and educational specialist, and my focus is helping you reverse the learning and behavior challenges of yourself, your child, or any student that you're working with. In today's video, I'm going to explore the role of the cerebellum and ways to enhance its function. And we've talked a lot about the cerebellum in even just the last video and other previous videos, but we're going to just focus on it in this video again. The cerebellum is known as the master coordinator. It receives inputs from the sensory systems and the cerebral cortex to coordinate movement, maintain equilibrium. It plays a role in cognition, speech, language, which was what my last video was on, attention, emotional regulation, personality traits, the reward system, and research are just scratching the surface about what the cerebellum really does. It receives input from sensory systems and cerebral cortex to coordinate movement and maintain equilibrium. Plays a particular role in muscle tone, coordination, balance, and posture. A lack of B vitamins affect the cerebellum, so does gluten, which causes an autoimmune response against the Purkinje cells of the cerebellum. And the roles of the cerebellum, so we have motor planning and execution. So it's involved in the precise timing and sequence of muscle contractions needed for smooth, purposeful movement, feedback control, balance and posture, muscle tone regulation, coordination of limb movements, eye movement control. So your eye movements, the cerebellum plays a huge role, and so does the prefrontal cortex. There's different types of eye movements that are controlled by the cerebellum than the frontal cortex. Learning and adaptation. It helps fine-tune movements based on experience, allowing the individuals to improve on their coordination. We have error correction, timing and rhythm. The cerebellum is different than the main cortex in that the right side will control the right side of the body. So as we know, normally the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, because right back in the brainstem is where the fibers cross. But it's in an area called the medulla. But the cerebellum, the right cerebellum actually is controlling the right side of the body. So we call that ipsilateral when it's on the same side, and not contralateral, which is the opposite side. So it kind of looks like a butterfly. So if I take it out, the problem is that it kind of comes apart. So it kind of looks like a butterfly. And there's 3 zones. So in the center, obviously it comes apart because it's a model, but in the center area is called the vermis. And then there's like here, there's the paravermal zone, which is the intermediate paravermal zone. And then the lateral zone, which is more on the outside here. The vermis controls, in the middle, controls the movement of like the trunk, the neck, the shoulders, the hip, the eyes, and the face, everything that's more like the core and the center of your body. And actually in kids with autism, they have their vermal zones are not very developed. And I think even in ADHD, I've read that. The intermediate controls the intermediate or the middle part controls areas like the elbows, the knees, the hands, the feet, and the gait. And then the lateral is the fine motor control and sequential and planned movements. Children with autism, like I say, have issues in the vermal area, and if you ever work with kids, you'll notice that the ones who struggle have a particular issue with finding their hips. So if you're a teacher, you may never have noticed that, but you might have noticed that their pants are pulled up like too high. Their general sense of self is just off. If I ever do any work and I have them lying on their side and I'm like having them try to put their hips into my hand, they can't find their hips. Their brain doesn't know where it is. The cerebellum doesn't initiate movement, but it does have direct connections to the muscles. It just coordinates it, so it makes the movement smoother. The initiation comes from the frontal cortex or the motor strip, but the cerebellum smooths it out. It gives feedback about what's happening with movement via the cortex and the brainstem. So there are 3 pathways. One is between the cortex and the cerebellum, which is called the cerebral cerebellum, and that's for motor planning. And I think I got that back right. I'll get that in a minute. For motor planning and motor learning. One from the proprioceptors, which are sensors in the joints, and the spinal cord, the spinal cerebellum for proprioception, muscle tone, error correction, and one for the vestibular system, the balance system of the inner ear, which is vestibulocerebellum for balance and eye movement. So we have the cerebral cerebellum, motor planning, motor learning, spinal cerebellum, proprioception, muscle tone, and vestibular cerebellum for balance and eye movements. So those are the three pathways. And the way, ways to test the cerebellum. So we can do the Romberg. You can have somebody it depends on how old they are. If they're older, they might need a little more stability, but just standing with one foot in front of the other and standing still, arms out, and see if they're wobbling. And if they wobble to one side, then that cerebellum might have issues. If they can do a tandem walk where they're walking, so heel-toe, so their heel and toe is touching each other. They can stand on a balance board, they can stand on one foot. There's a lot of ways to test your cerebellum for the balance. So think about, that's for balance. You can kind of notice if kids have issues with motor planning and motor learning, then their cerebral cerebellum is probably off. If they have proprioceptive and muscle tone, if they have low muscle tone, then the spinal cerebellum is probably off. And if they have poor balance and eye movements, then their vestibular cerebellum is probably off. And then challenging the cerebellum in order to improve muscle tone, especially if you engage the vestibular system with it. So spinning is a really good, like the vestibular system, when you activate the vestibular system, you can help improve muscle tone. So doing, activating that vestibular cerebellar pathway is really good for activating or for improving muscle tone. So things like spinning, merry-go-rounds, and sitting in an office chair. Now, some kids cannot tolerate spinning. That means they need to do it, but they need to go very, very slow and do it little amounts of time and build up to it. I had students who we used to do this, like the brain dance, and you can look it online. And the very last activity is vestibular, where they spin. And after 3 months, one of my students says, "Oh, I can do it the whole time now," which is 10 seconds or something. And I didn't even know that she had issues. It's just that I always instruct my students, once you get dizzy, don't get to the point where you're dizzy. Once you start to feel uncomfortable, you stop, and then you build up to it. By the way, if you like this content, check out my other videos in this channel where I explore the role of the brain, how to support its function. You may be interested in the course on how to integrate primitive reflexes, because we do talk a lot about the cerebellum, which helps develop weaker areas in the brain, such as the cerebellum. You can find more information in this link below, or just message me directly. And I put out these videos on Mondays, and Wednesday we'll have my tips and tricks of the week. So be sure to subscribe so you know when that comes out, and make sure you go back and watch the other videos, because I do talk about, like in the last video, I talked about the cerebellum and the role of language. So we didn't cover everything about the cerebellum, for example, but I have talked about it in different videos. So until next time, have a great rest of your week.